Yes. Dipersilakan ahli-ahli yang berhormat serta hadirin sekalian untuk mengambil tempat di tempat masing-masing di dalam Dewan kerana majlis akan bermula sebentar lagi. Para hadirin diminta untuk sama-sama berdiri sebaik saja pengumuman ketibaan tetamu kehormat dibuat oleh pengacara majlis. Meminimalkan sebarang pergerakan sepanjang majlis berjalan dan mematikan telefon bimbit atau tukarkan kepada mod senyap. Terima kasih.
All members of parliament, senators, honourable dignitaries and members of the floor, please be seated as the program will begin shortly. Members of the floor are kindly reminded to stand upon the arrival of VIPs as announced by the MCs later. Please turn off or put your mobile devices in silent mode, and we would also appreciate if members of the floor could limit any movements throughout the program. Thank you.
Mengumumkan ketibaan Yang Amat Mulia Tunku Zainal Abidin Ibni Tuanku Muhriz.
Announcing the arrival of Yang Amat Mulia Tunku Zainal Abidin Ibni Tuanku Muhriz. Distinguished guests, please remain standing for the national anthem Negaraku.
Hadirin sekalian dipersilakan duduk. Mawar di taman mekana indah, harum mewangi di rumpun pandan. Terukir senyuman pembuka kalimah, selamat datang Tunku yang diraikan. Yang Amat Mulia Tunku Zainal Abidin Ibni Tuanku Muhriz, Yang Berhormat Datuk Muhammad Arif Mat Yusof, Yang Dipertua Dewan Rakyat, Yang Berhormat ahli-ahli parlimen, tuan yang terutama, duta-duta, seterusnya yang berbahagia Tan Sri, Datuk-datuk, datin-datin, rakan-rakan media, tuan-tuan dan puan-puan sekalian. Assalamualaikum, salam hormat, salam pembuka bicara, kapur dipalit, siri dibuka. Alhamdulillah, bersyukur kita ke hadrat ilahi kerana dengan limpah kurnianya dapat kita bersama-sama berkumpul dalam dewan yang seberindah ini bagi menjayakan program siri syarahan yang dipertua dengan tajuk pada hari ini, Parlimen dan Masyarakat Madani, Suara Rakyat.
Yang Amat Mulia Tunku Zainal Abidin Ibni Tuanku Muhriz, Yang Berhormat Datuk Muhammad Arif bin Mat Yusof, Speaker of the House of Representatives, Honourable Members of Parliament, Your Excellency Ambassadors, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum and a very good evening. Welcome to the very first Speakers Lecture Series entitled Parliament and Civil Society, The Voice of the Rakyat.
Sidang hari ini yang dimuliakan, hari ini kita berkumpul sempena penganjuran program yang selaras dengan komitmen Parlimen Malaysia untuk memulakan inisiatif memantap dan memodernkan parlimen serta membangunkan dan menyemai budaya demokrasi berparlimen. Bagi mencapai tujuan ini, program siri syarahan yang dipertua diadakan untuk merakyatkan parlimen dengan menyebarkan kesedaran tentang fungsi dan peranan parlimen kepada pelbagai lapisan masyarakat.
Ladies and gentlemen, in line with the agenda of institutional reforms, one of the key factors in enhancing parliamentary democracy is to open the parliament to the people. By organizing various outreach programs, Parliament will be more inclusive. Parliament will also be able to engage with different levels of society, bringing the institution closer to the rakyat. And this program, the Speakers Lecture Series, is part of that initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, now we would like to invite Yang Berhormat Datuk Muhammad Arif bin Mat Yusof, Speaker of the House of Representatives, to deliver his welcoming speech.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan salam sejahtera. Yang berusaha pengucara-pengucara majlis, Yang Amat Mulia Tunku Zainal Abidin Ibni Tuanku Muhriz, Presiden Pengasas Institut Demokrasi dan Hal Ehwal Ekonomi (IDS), Yang Berhormat Datuk Haji Muhammad Rashid Hasnun Timbalan, Yang di-Pertua Dewan Rakyat, Yang Berhormat Tuan Wong Chen, Ahli Parlimen Subang, merangkap model Sri Datuk, tuan-tuan dan puan-puan hadirin yang dihormati sekalian. Alhamdulillah, sebagai pembuka bicara, saya ingin mengalu-alukan kehadiran para tetamu ke Dewan Mulia ini untuk meraihkan syarahan umum yang pertama dalam siri syarahan umum yang di-Pertua Dewan Rakyat atau Speakers Lecture Series. Terima kasih dan selamat datang kepada semua kerana sudi hadir di sini pada petang ini. Saya juga berbesar hati melihat betapa minatnya orang awam dengan syarahan umum ini khususnya dan pada amnya terhadap kegiatan dan prosiding Parlimen Malaysia. Bagi kami di sini, inilah petanda yang baik. Memang seharusnya orang awam berminat dan selesa dengan parlimen sebagai institusi negara yang memperjuangkan kepentingan rakyat jelata. Oleh kerana ramai juga para hadirin luar negara di sini yang mungkin tidak fasih dalam bahasa Malaysia, izinkan saya sekarang meneruskan ucapan saya dalam bahasa Inggeris. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, it is a pleasure to extend a very warm welcome to you all to this august house. More so to this very first lecture of the Speakers Lecture Series by Yang Amat Mulia Tuanku Zainal Abidin, Ibni Tuanku Muhriz, whose profile speaks volumes about his remarkable and impressive achievements. Tunku Zain and I belong to the same alumni, the London School of Economics and Political Science. But I can assure you that this is not the only reason why he is here. Tunku Zain is a well-known and respected public speaker, a committed advocate for social change, a writer and columnist, an accomplished musician, and of course, the founding president of the respected think tank, the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs, IDEAS. It is therefore our great honor, Yang Mulia, Tunku Zain, to have you as our speaker today. Thank you very much for this honor. Ladies and gentlemen, these lectures, this series of lectures, which are akin to the ones held in Westminster, are aimed at providing a platform for the expression of thought-provoking ideas and for exchange of thought and possible logical solutions to some of the issues pertaining to Parliament and parliamentary affairs. The Speakers Lecture Series is not meant to be confined to MPs alone, but is meant also for the parliamentary staff, civil servants who attend to parliamentary affairs for their respective ministries, of course, professors and lecturers and students of our various universities, and generally to the interested and thinking public at large. As I mentioned just now, this is the beginning of a series of lectures to be held. I anticipate having this public lecture yearly at the close of each parliamentary session. But this doesn't mean to say that we're not going to have our ordinary lectures from time to time, but this is a special occasion, speaker's lecture, which I hope to have yearly at the close of each parliamentary session. These lectures are intended to cover a wide range of topics pertaining to parliamentary democracy and parliamentary affairs. Topics like cabinet and parliament, parliament in relation to the civil service, parliamentary procedure, the judiciary and parliament, and so forth, to name a few areas, could be topics for our future discussion or lectures. Ladies and gentlemen, parliament, like the concept of democracy, can mean many different things to different people. Some, for example, may see parliament as principally a system in which the citizen can participate in political decision-making through their elected representatives. Some others may see it as more like an institution to check and balance the executive in a system of responsible government. Some others may still believe that parliament serves as an expression of the collective wisdom and will of the citizenry, whatever that may connote. It is through these lectures that hopefully we can explore, understand, and synthesize grand political theories with modern-day political, social, and economic realities. Engaging with civil society, therefore, is a good start. What civil society perceives about Parliament is very pertinent for us to understand the interplay between Parliament as a working institution and civil society, hence the topic of this lecture, which is very important. Ladies and gentlemen, yesterday, the Dewan Rakyat adjourned its sitting sine die to a date to be fixed. But actually, we know the parliamentary sessions will begin in March, but we'll wait for the official announcement. Under the new government, Parliament has sat for a total of 50 days over a period of less than 5 months. I think we can give a pat on our back for this. It's been hard, particularly the last bit on the budget. I think many of the MPs are now smiling, smiling with relief, I hope, after 30 days of hard debates. A number of reforms have been introduced, particularly in relation to institutionalizing special select committees and encouraging the formation of caucuses, among other things. Parliament has also been active in hosting workshops, seminars, meetings, and having engagement with our stakeholders and the public at large on issues of parliamentary and electoral reforms and a host of other lively topics. I think I can say with some confidence and have diffidence as well. Almost every other week seemed to have passed with something being held over the weekend. Some of you may have attended some of these courses and workshops and whatnot. This first speaker's lecture forms part of our overall reform effort to ensure the position of the Parliament of Malaysia as being transparent and accessible to the public, whilst at the same time maintaining its high dignity as the so-called august house. It is therefore my fervent hope that you will have a very meaningful dialogue and discussion on today's topic with our respected speaker, Yang Amat Mulia Tunku Zainal Abidin. Let me now, with your permission, to switch to Bahasa Malaysia, since I'm ending this short speech. Para hadirin yang dihormati sekalian, akhir kata, saya ingin sekali lagi mengalu-alukan kehadiran tuan-tuan dan puan-puan yang saya muliakan ke Parlimen atau rumah berbicara, place for people to talk and debate, whatever. Sudah tentu banyak manfaat yang akan dapat kita perolehi melalui syarahan yang dipertua yang pertama ini dalam suasana dan dalam perkarangan Parlimen kita ini. I've always encouraged having lectures, workshops, and serious deliberations within the precinct of Parliament. If you want to deal with parliamentary affairs, it is best, I think, to be here to discuss. Let me end by, biar akhir kata, saya ingin memberi sedikit pantun pada semua yang hadir, bukan sebab apa, tapi dalam sesi yang baru lalu, tiap-tiap hari saya dengar pantun. Jadi hari ini pun saya ingin mempersembahkan pantun. Kualitinya saya tak boleh jamin, tapi biar persembahkan sedikit pantun, lengkap pantun. Rendang sungguh si pohon ara, tumbuh subur di tepian paya. Salam hamba di rumah berbicara, medan tersusun bahasa dan budaya. Dengan lafaz mulia Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, saya dengan resminya mengisytiharkan permulaan syarahan pertama yang dipertua ini. Sekian, wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you to Yang Berhormat Datuk for the speech. Ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed, we present to you a special montage. Next, we would like to invite Yang Berhormat Wong Chen, Member of Parliament for Subang, to introduce our special guest. Please welcome Yang Berhormat.
Thank you. Dato' Speaker, Members of Parliament, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, allow me to give a very short introduction of Yang Amat Mulia Tunku Datuk Sri Zainal Abidin, Ibni, Tuanku, Muhriz. Tunku Zain is the founding president of the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs, IDEAS. He's a trustee of Yayasan Chauket, Yayasan Munarah, the Jeffrey Chia Foundation, and the Genovasi Foundation. Tunku Zain is known to be a libertarian, though not manically ideological. I picked this up after watching a YouTube video on him. I, on the other hand, is from the progressive left, so I think we're going to have some bit of fun at the Q&A session later. Now, Tunku Zain received his early education at the Alice Smith School, then to Marlborough College, and finally to the London School of Economics, where he obtained his MSc in comparative politics. He worked in the UK Houses of Parliament. We would like to recruit him as a special advisor, I'm sure, Dato' Speaker. The World Bank, United Nations Development Programme, and the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy before returning permanently to Malaysia. He has written hundreds of columns, and he has had 3 books published and 1 coffee table book. Tunku Zain is also an Eisenhower Fellow. He's a very keen sportsman. He enjoys squash, tennis, kayaking, and more recently, horseback archery. I'm not sure how he got into horseback archery. Perhaps we can ask him at the Q&A session, but we all hope here today that it doesn't involve a Mongolian model. He is also an accomplished pianist and a patron to several associations, musical associations. In short, I think we all can agree that Tunku Zain is a Renaissance man, a prolific writer, worldly, well-traveled, a sportsman, an artist, and most importantly, a Malaysian who cares deeply about nation building. His speech today is titled Parliament and Civil Society, the Voice of the Rakyat, in question mark. The speech will address issues regarding the new Malaysia, what we fight every day here in this august house on the issues for the Malaysia's future. As such, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Yang Amat Mulia Tunku Zain.
Thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yang berhormat Tuan Yang Dipertua Dewan Rakyat dan Timbalan, Yang berhormat Tuan Moderator, Yang berhormat ahli-ahli Dewan Rakyat dan Dewan Negara, Senator, Tuan dan Puan Yang Terutama Pesuruhjaya Tinggi dan duta-duta, tuan-tuan dan puan-puan. Pertama sekali, saya ingin memanjatkan kesyukuran kehadrat Ilahi kerana dengan limpah kurnianya kita dapat berkumpul di Dewan Yang Mulia ini untuk syarahan pertama Tuan Yang Dipertua Dewan Rakyat. Terima kasih diucapkan kepada Yang Berhormat Datuk Muhammad Arif Muhammad Yusof atas jemputan pada hari ini. Saya amat berbesar hati kerana diberikan peluang berada di Dewan yang memertabatkan prinsip syura yang berasaskan sistem perbincangan, perundingan dan nasihat di antara wakil-wakil rakyat. Sesungguhnya, konsep demokrasi berparlimen mewarisi penggumbalan undang-undang seperti mana yang dilaksanakan sejak zaman Kesultanan Melayu. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, before the 14th general election, several friends and colleagues suggested that I attempt to become a member of this august house. Their argument was that I would be able to advocate change by debating and enacting legislation, and bring matters of importance from a constituency to the national stage. My consistent reply ever since previous elections was that you don't need to be a politician to effect change. And with the beginning of this lecture series initiated by the Honourable Speaker, I am hopeful that parliamentarians will be eager to hear a range of outside views, while outsiders who rarely interact with Parliament will be able to come and appreciate how it operates. Malaysian parliamentary democracy ought to be a truly unique inheritance, a fusion of Westminster experience, international best practices, and a local narrative of constitutionalism. To me, this begins with the conversion of the Hindu Raja of Kedah to Islam in 1136, to the nascent idea of rule of law expressed in the Batu Bersurat Terengganu of 1326, to the Minangkabau socio-political practices of election and decentralization that began in 1347, which later evolved in Negeri Sembilan, to the Undang-Undang Melaka that enabled free trade prosperity in the 15th century, to the modern constitution of Johor of 1895, and of course, to the various native systems that have thrived on both sides of the South China Sea. In the words of the third Yang di-Pertuan Agong, Tuanku Said Putra Jamalulal, when declaring this building open in 1963, and I quote, "There can be no grander witness than this great structure itself of the ideals and hopes that people of Malaysia share. What is profoundly important here is that this building symbolizes our highest ideals of democracy," end quote. I am therefore humbled to speak in a venue that symbolizes this legacy and to do so in the presence of such a distinguished audience. I must confess, my heart rate did jump a little bit 10 minutes before I arrived upon discovering that it was going to be broadcast live and upon discovering there's only one of these lectures a year. So nonetheless, it is a particular privilege to be the first speaker of this series. Even if I end up being the worst, there is some cachet in being the first. So today I will share my experience and observations of Malaysian civil society, how it has contributed to Malaysian policy making thus far, before sharing some thoughts about how a new dynamic between Parliament and civil society can contribute significantly to healing and rejuvenating our nation according to the principles of Merdeka. Growing up, I always enjoyed history and geography, and the computer games that I played always contained strategic decisions about economic growth, infrastructure development, and military tactics. This later translated into academic choices, ultimately leading to degrees in sociology, government, and comparative politics at the London School of Economics. And it was here that I built upon my understandings of political theory and philosophy, but more importantly, to see them in action. Being a citizen of a Commonwealth country living in the United Kingdom, my university hall of residence automatically registered me as a voter. Now, whether exercising the right to vote in another country violates Malaysian law has been a subject of contention, but certainly there is a tradition of Malaysian students in London being active in British politics. One famous example is Tun Abdul Razak, who was reportedly active in the Labour Party. Many more Malaysians have participated in rallies and marches while studying overseas, and my first was protesting against the invasion of Iraq by the governments of George W. Bush and Tony Blair without a United Nations resolution. But I was also exposed to other forms of advocacy when I embarked on internships and attended the many events of British think tanks within the Westminster bubble. There I discovered a vast plethora of organizations, some defined by ideology, others by loyalty to political parties, that worked to influence the formulation of public policy. At the same time, I was keeping up my interest in Malaysian politics. The events of 1998 that precipitated Reformasi took place when I was still in boarding school. I remember watching the opening ceremony of the Commonwealth Games with my friends, who asked me about our then Yang di-Pertuan Agong, Tuanku Jaafar, who accompanied Queen Elizabeth II in the car going around Stadium Bukit Jalil. But soon after, Malaysia was again in the news when our Deputy Prime Minister was sacked, arrested, and then acquired a black eye. And it was, of course, the logo of an eye that brought our current Prime Minister into office earlier this year. Now, no one could have predicted that back then. But with other Malaysians living in London, I had fascinating conversations that stimulated an interest in somehow contributing to our country. And it was with two of those friends, one Saiful, one Jan, and one Muhammad Firdaus, one Muhammad Fuad, that I co-founded the Malaysia think tank London, which later evolved into the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs Ideas. And I am very proud, together with the board of directors and the senior management team, of its achievements since then. We are now quoted almost daily in the news on diverse areas of policy. We have cultivated international partnerships and have achieved global recognition, including in international rankings of think tanks. But much more important are the relationships that we have built in Malaysia with the government, with the political parties, the civil service, academics, students, and the public at large. Now, you might say that these are the standard range of relationships expected of a think tank, but it wasn't easy at the beginning. It was difficult for some people to believe that we were motivated by the promotion of rule of law, limited government, individual liberty, and free markets. Together with Tunku Abdul Rahman's proclamation that we would forever be a nation based on the principles of liberty and justice, we believe that these values were central to the foundations of our country, are embedded in the federal constitution, therapy, and medical treatments for affected families. On property rights, we have published a policy paper titled Intellectual Property Rights in ASEAN and have been the local partner for the International Property Rights Index. On transport, we have explored Malaysia's acknowledgement and regularization of ride sharing and expressed caution on regulatory costs to part-time drivers that may reduce services for users. On aviation, we have explored the economic benefits of the ASEAN single aviation market, evaluating its advantages, what has been achieved so far, and what remains to be done. On the reform of government-linked companies, we have built upon our best-selling book, Ministry of Finance Incorporated, with the Malaysia GLC Monitor 2018, led by Professor Edmund Terence Gomez, focusing on the diverse forms in which government intervenes in the economy. This work represents the most comprehensive analysis of GLCs at both the federal and state levels. On institution building, we have advocated reforms for Parliament to make it more independent, including reform of the Dewan Negara. We have called for the Attorney General's roles as legal advisor to the government and the public prosecutor to be split, and we have championed the benefits of decentralization in the context of our federal system. On food security, we have published a report on agricultural subsidies, which provides an extensive look at the paddy and rice sector in Malaysia, one of the most assisted and subsidized industries in the country, which has implications for the cost of rice production and productivity. On energy, we have published a paper on Malaysia's energy policy challenges, which discusses the global energy scenario, Malaysia's place within it, and explains why energy innovation ought to be at the forefront of the national development strategy. On ASEAN, we have restarted our positively received engagement with a report on ASEAN economic integration, which concludes that there remain numerous institutional, economic, and political challenges to that goal. And on education, no doubt the most important long-term key to unlocking progress on all of these fronts, we have advocated the introduction of trust schools, the idea of vouchers, more autonomy for universities, greater freedom for principals and teachers in secondary schools, and reforms in the curriculum to place civic education and national unity at the forefront. Beyond that, we have worked with the UNHCR and UNICEF to strengthen the rights of children and refugees through the establishment of Ideas Academy, a private secondary educational institution for underprivileged students, as well as the Ideas Autism Center to provide early intervention care and education for autistic children, particularly from low-income families. The experience of the parents and students at both institutions has been immensely encouraging. Across all of these public policy areas, my colleagues and I have written hundreds of opinion pieces over the years. And while many of our proposals have been incorporated into recent election manifestos, it can be difficult to quantify our influence. Not that that really matters. We are not seeking elected office. We are only seeking a better Malaysia. And there are so many others who contribute to that debate, which is so important in ensuring a multiplicity of views on issues such as protecting local, urban, and rural communities, the environment, animal welfare, and other areas of public concern. Wearing hats in several other organizations, I am lucky also to see the perspectives of public listed companies, educational institutions, charitable foundations, sports associations, and cultural bodies towards the impact of government policy. Many of these would not be defined as civil society organizations, yet they too contribute. And I would mention, for example, the considerable corporate support I have seen towards causes such as the rights of Orang Asli communities or the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Yet, while there have been great collaborations, it would be ignorant and arrogant to assume that there is a broad consensus on all issues. Beyond tactical disagreements on how to achieve certain policy goals, for example, whether affordable housing should be built directly by government or through fiscal incentives to the private sector, it is crucial to remember that civil society also includes many contrarians and reactionaries, including those who wish to divide rather than unite the Malaysian people. And it may also include those who take up the garb of civil society, even though they are, in reality, agents of political parties and provocateurs. And in recent weeks, we have seen how racial and religious rhetoric has been used to pit one set of Malaysians against another. Of course, we are not alone in the world in facing threats to national unity. In the United States of America, the election and continued office of President Donald Trump rests upon a populist narrative of the distrust of traditional institutions, that only by draining the swamp can the nation be fixed? This has accentuated a polarization that I first saw when I lived in Washington, D.C. back in 2005. Citizens can proclaim loyalty to the very same constitution and yet pursue completely opposing ideological or political views. However, the US Constitution so explicitly demands separation of powers that there may be sufficient checks and balances to ensure the survival of that democracy. With Brexit in the United Kingdom, although there may have been many well-argued reasons for leaving the European Union, particularly from the view of legal and parliamentary sovereignty, much of the sentiment of the vote was also driven by a populist distrust of institutions. And right now, political turmoil seems to characterize the process, with both Brexiteers and Remainers seemingly unable to agree on the way forward. And I think at this very minute, Theresa May may be facing a vote of no confidence. I think she would rather be in this chamber right now. And in Paris, on the fourth weekend of the Gilets jaunes protests, the police were firing water cannons and physically ramming into crowds of protesters with riot shields. And on the same day, Kuala Lumpur also saw a rally, one that was, by comparison, rather peaceful, in which participants celebrated the government's decision to not ratify the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, ICED. That decision is one example of some of the promises that have been reversed, delayed, or downplayed in the face of public pressure since the general election. And that is why, although it is still true that Malaysia has bucked the trend in an age of populism in electing a government committed to institutional reform, the counter-reactions to these efforts have been immense too. And this gives rise to a situation in which some CSOs will be asking the government to stick to their manifesto commitments, while others will be asking the government to abandon them. The positive side of this is that public debate on contentious issues will become a normal feature of Malaysian democracy. The negative side of this is that passions can become heated and the threat of violence may surface. And that is why it is important for the law, the police, and other institutions to play their role in moderating this discourse. Parliament is at the forefront of those institutions, and I'm heartened that reforms are taking place that will enable a closer interplay between MPs and civil society through the establishment of 6 new standing committees with roles of oversight, legislative scrutiny, and the evaluation of major appointments. One of the features of similar committees in other parliamentary democracies are the extensive sessions in which views are sought from diverse stakeholders as to the potential impact of proposed legislation. Through these forums, 2 groups claiming to represent the people will be able to work together in a structured manner that has not been done before. But apart from these standing committees and this lecture series, there is another area where Parliament and civil society should work together, namely civic education, so that young Malaysians have a shared understanding of our federal constitution, why we have the institutions we have, what their roles are, and what their rights and responsibilities as citizens are. Naturally, incorporating this into the curriculum is the role of the Ministry of Education, and the Minister has already expressed his intention to do so. Perhaps one source of inspiration could be the Malaysian Bar's Rakyat Guides of some years ago, each dealing with a particular aspect of the federal constitution through very succinct pamphlets. I have visited far too many secondary schools where, when I ask, why do we have a Dewan Rakyat, there is no response. I cannot help but make a comparison to the British curriculum, where students are exposed to the Magna Carta and the origins of the British Parliament and its importance even before their teenage years, with syllabi at more advanced levels adding to those initial lessons of rule of law and constitutionalism. As I pointed out in my Healing the Nation lecture a couple of years ago, we are already seeing how different groups of Malaysians are interpreting the very vision of our nation in completely different terms. It does not help that too many young Malaysians grow up never meeting other young Malaysians of different backgrounds. But as much as programs to foster national harmony across ethnic, religious, and cultural differences are vital, they should also inculcate a shared sense of citizenship based on the federal constitution. Parliament is the best body to fulfill this role. For while politicians and political parties seek to acquire power for themselves, Parliament as an institution exists to moderate the worst excesses of any government. That must be the understanding of Parliament going forward, not a mere rubber stamp of the executive as it was perceived in the past. In recent years, I have been fortunate to have interacted with members on both sides of the House, some of them since before they became MPs. Most went into politics for noble reasons, and yet I sympathize with the multiple pressures that they experience. Pressure from leaders to support ill-considered proposals, pressure from party colleagues to support their bid for positions, pressure from progressives who want reforms, pressure from conservatives who don't, pressure from corporate players who want contracts in exchange for donations, pressure from unionists who want legislative change in exchange for support. And at the end of the day, I have even seen the most enlightened, most idealistic individuals surrender to these pressures, entering a downward spiral of ever more promises that cannot conceivably be delivered and the continuous placation of disparate groups. These transactional relationships will always be a reality of politics. But I would hope that Parliament and civil society can work together to craft a broader vision of national progress, one that is based on what was agreed by our forefathers. At the same time, it must take cognizance of the real strengths of feeling that permeate throughout the land. Why, for example, many Malaysian Muslims are upset by a treaty that the majority of OIC countries have signed, or why vernacular education remains so paramount to different language communities, or why Sabahans and Sarawakians can be so passionate about their rights, or why indeed institutions matter at all when so many people are struggling to make ends meet. So it needs to be shown that institutional renewal will improve the lives of everyone, that the bottom 40% will benefit when strong institutions that prevent billions of ringgit from being stolen or enable open tenders and transparent bidding that bring down the cost of housing and infrastructure. It is strong institutions that give the market confidence to invest in Malaysia, hire Malaysians, and provide the goods and services that the private sector can deliver more efficiently than the government ever can. There will always be greedy, corrupt, and egotistical people in public office, but it is strong institutions that can prevent them, and indeed our own temptations from prevailing. Ladies and gentlemen, the government, parliament, and civil society all purport to represent the people. But unlike politicians, civil society's success will not be threatened by the electoral cycle. We can continue to speak our mind, regardless of the flip-flopping that politicians are prone to do, or the good cop, bad cop routine that different leaders among the same party or coalition feel is necessary. This gives us the ability to pursue issues regardless of which politicians are in office at any particular time. And it is our consistency in researching topics of public concern and our determination to pursue desired changes that gives us our legitimacy. In this unfolding new chapter of our country's story, I believe that a strong, healthy, and transparent relationship between Parliament and civil society will enable better discourse, elevate debate, and truly express the voice of the rakyat. This is crucial to the sustainability of Malaysian democracy. I would like to finish my lecture by quoting the first Yang di-Pertuan Agong, Tuanku Abdul Rahman Ibni Almarhum Tuanku Muhammad, when His Majesty opened the very first session of Parliament on the 12th of September, 1959. The Constitution of the Federation of Malaya is a democratic achievement of the highest order. It is a product of many minds working with a common aim to evolve a basic charter for this new Malayan nation of ours. A charter drawn from our past experience and suited to the conditions of our surroundings and way of life. A charter of our firm faith in the concepts and traditions of parliamentary democracy. And finally, and most important of all, a charter of our common belief that certain fundamental liberties are essential to the dignity and self-respect of man. We are pulling a switch which starts two dynamos of democracy, our constitution and our parliament. We urge all of you to approach your deliberations as lawmakers in the highest spirit of dedicated service to our nation. We urge that your bearing should be related to the importance of your tasks and consonant with the dignity of the House. We urge you always to remember that you are the representatives of all the people, without exception, and that what you do here shall be done for the benefit of all the people. We urge you to conduct your affairs in such a way that the Parliament of the Federation of Malaya will be a shining beacon of democracy at its brightest and best. From this day onwards, this Parliament of ours will be the centre of national attention for all Malayans wherever they may be. The progress of this Parliament will be watched not by Malayans alone. Tuan Yang Dipertua, dengan petikan titah diraja Sri Paduka Baginda Yang di-Pertuan Agong pertama itu, saya mengakhiri ucapan saya. Thank you. Terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Yang Amat Mulia, for the speech. Ladies and gentlemen, next, we would like to invite Yang Berhormat Wong Chen to proceed with the question and answer session. Please, sir.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's quite simple, the rules. If you see there's a mic in front of you, if you have a question, just press the mic and you can speak. Please introduce yourself. Try to keep the question short.